So hi everybody, welcome back to Law Hero, and my name is Jen, but you can call me Law Hero because I am your Law Hero. So this video is one I had never thought of making actually myself. I didn't even think it was relevant as a topic, but I suppose if you're going through it, it would probably be nice to get a few tips. Oh, sorry about that. So as I was saying, today we're going to be talking about how to write a dissertation. And when I say dissertation, I mean it in a very broad sense, as in I mean it as in an extra long essay. We're all used to writing essays in college, whatever. You gather your materials, and it's usually 2,500 words, max 4,000 words. But I'm talking about the big kahunas here. I'm talking about 70,000 words. This is my one, by the way. 102 pages. I actually don't know if I set out the word count at the start of it. I don't think I did. So yeah, as in like a piece of work that takes you like a year. For example, a master thesis. I would actually go as far as to say my advice would extend to people who are writing doctoral thesis, because basically if you do an LLM, like your doctorate thesis, yeah, okay, you need much more research and you need more like time with your supervisor and stuff. You need more like one-on-one and discussion, but it's broadly the same principles. So that's what we're going to speak about today. So I'm going to take you through the process of my master thesis, and it got a 3.9 GPA, which is about roughly 90%. And that was both from the internal examiner as well as the external examiner, and both of those people were professors of law at the Goethe University, where I got my master thesis. Okay, so the very first question is, obviously, if you're doing an LLM and it's a broad LLM, you have to figure out which area of law you want to research. Obviously, for me, it was easy. It had to be in the area of finance because I was doing an LLM in finance. And actually, so what I would suggest to you is, if you know you have to write the master thesis after the year is done, all year, and especially if you're working, keep your ears and eyes open for a topic that interests you. So I'll give you a bit of background around mine and how I came about my topic, and it certainly wasn't from my own head. So my thesis was on the benchmark regulation, which has now been in force since the start of 2020. But I wrote my master thesis in 2014 when the regulation was just an EU proposal. And at the time I was working as a paralegal in Baker McKenzie. Baker McKenzie, it's not Baker and McKenzie anymore, it's Baker McKenzie now. And one of our clients in the capital markets department came to the partner I was working for and asked for a memorandum on how the new proposed benchmark proposal would affect their benchmark and indices business, their internal business. So in typical German fashion, they had gun jumped, because the reason I'm saying gun jumping is because when a piece of legislation is at proposal level, that is very, very young in the legislative process, in that you've had some input from trade organisations, but you haven't really teased out the ins and outs of how the regulation is going to affect the industry long term. And with the benchmark regulation, and indeed with many other regulations, it takes so many rounds of presidencies, so many rounds of discussions, legislative discussions, until you get the final piece of paper. And like the benchmark regulation we have now is not very different, but there are broad discrepancies to what I wrote about at the time it was proposed. So just be wary of that. So the client came to us with this idea, and I was immediately like, okay, I don't know anything about indices and benchmarks and how they're used in financial contracts and instruments. Number one, this could actually really help my learning, and number two, I really would like to do it as a research topic, because there is very little legal analysis on how this new, like I looked around and how this new regulation is going to affect people who use benchmarks and indices in those contracts and instruments. So I was killing two birds with the one stone. I was not only doing the research for the client, but I also thought this is going to be great as a master thesis. And that's how I got the idea. So I would encourage you to do the same thing. Practically what you can do is like sign up to legal kind of newsletters, keep an eye out on LinkedIn to see, you know, like now at the moment it's all about legal tech and legal innovation. They're kind of the sexy areas of law at the moment. Finance is always, like, you know, for example, we have like the green bonds at the moment and kind of green finance, like that's an area that's really hot topic. I would encourage you to look at an area that's changing a lot. Like, of course, you can do something archaic like criminal law or equity or something like that, but do you really want to spend, you know, a lot of your time researching something archaic? Wouldn't you prefer to do like research something that's applicable to everyday life? I certainly would. So that would be my first tip. Make sure you're interested in the topic, make sure it's relevant, you know, it's not something that's old and it's not really applicable to everyday life. Okay, so the second then area is how do you go about bringing together your materials? And for me, I read every single article I could on the Financial Times. I went to the library, I got every single book I could. I read like all the transcripts between the traders who were rigging LIBOR. I just read and read and read as much as I could. And then I saved it all down into a folder called resources. And then anything that was from a book, I photocopied it and I just kept it with me. Then what I did was I actually downloaded the regulation and then I read every single contribution from every trade organisation who had been involved in the proposal's drafting. And then as a final step, and I would definitely suggest this if you are covering an EU regulation or proposal for regulation, is to contact the MEP who's the rapporteur. So these MEPs, and like I only know this because I worked in Parliament, they are all given like an area of, you know, that they have to work within. So for example, when I was in Strasbourg, I was working for Sean Kelly MEP, who's the rapporteur for the GDPR. And back at the time, like I had no idea that the GDPR was going to become what it became. But like I was very, very close to his drafting and his exposure to different trade organizations and, like, you know, all of the people who had an opinion on how the GDPR was going to affect their business, and especially with the opt-in and the opt-out, because for, you know, direct marketing, because we hadn't had that before, and that really impacted a lot of business, specifically you know, ones who use marketing without consent, like magazines. You know, these trade magazines, they sometimes leave you know, like these slips in your letterbox. They're not allowed to do that anymore unless you've consented to them having your personal details. Anyway, I digress. It is very handy to know the rapporteur, and I actually got in contact, I think her name was like Cora van Neuvenhuizen. She's a Dutch MEP and she was responsible for the regulation I was covering, and I got in contact with her stagiaire, some like Dutch guy who was her paralegal essentially, and he was like my feeder of information. So I was like, okay, can you get me this, can you get me that? And he was really, really great, and I actually thanked them at the start of my thesis. So yeah, it's like, what I'm trying to say is having a wealth of information will really up the quality of your thesis, you know, because like a thesis is only good as the research, it's only good as the input. So spend an awful lot of time gathering your resources, and once you've done that, you move on to step 3. So now we're on step 3. So we have number 1, pick a title, number 2, get your resources, and number 3, now you have to action your resources. So I spent an awful lot of time trying to work out how to best approach, like, and even ask myself, what was my thesis here? So just broadly, like obviously when a new piece of regulation comes in, the question is, will it actually have an impact on the industry it's affecting? So for here, it's benchmarks. And like obviously, this regulation came in the wake of a scandal, and like that's what happens, you know. Usually something has to happen in order for there to be regulatory change. There needs to be some impetus for change. So I suppose my thesis was, would the regulation actually affect behavior of traders, of users? So that was my thesis, and then my aim was to say either yes or no, having done my research and given my analysis. So that was basically where I was going, was to end up with a yes or no answer. So ultimately, spoiler, I came up with yes, it was a good idea, and it is a good idea. So then the question was how to structure it. So obviously, you have a scheme to any piece of legislation. So my broad kind of plan was, okay, like broadly discuss what the thesis was going to be, look at like the run up to the regulation coming in. So I'll just try and get my contents here. Where is it now? Yeah, so explain like what benchmarks and indices are, then go into the background around the scandal, because then I'm like teeing up the regulation. Then I spoke about like concurrent regulatory movements. And by the way, what I'm saying right here is exactly what I did for the cryptocurrencies article I wrote in the Gazette. I just applied the same metric, what I'm doing now. So then I looked at like concurrent movement in regulation, so globally, so like what was being done internationally, what was being done at EU level, what was being done nationally. Had any countries already sought to regulate this domestically? And then I went in to analyse the proposal, and obviously that was the bulk of the work. And then I had to apply like EU, because it's an EU regulation, I had to apply, you know, like subsidiarity and proportionality, and speak about the legislative journey, like the ordinary legislative procedure between the Council, the Parliament and the Commission. And then I did a substantive analysis of the regulation, so literally went down through every single part of the regulation and commented based on what the trade associations rather had said, and then kind of, you know, have a discussion around was what they said legitimate. And then I had a conclusion, and that was quite simply what I did, and that is what I would always do if I was analysing any piece of regulation. And I've done it with the MiCA, which is the Markets and Crypto Assets regulation as well, and that's basically all you have to do. Now, there's obviously a lot more to it than that. Like, you know, there's the emotional and physical side around writing a thesis. It's extremely tedious. You need an awful lot of concentration. You need very little distractions. You need people around you who understand what you're going through. You need to be very, very disciplined with yourself. And like, actually, in my master thesis, I wrote at the very, very start, Ascoelga, Niveen an rát ach mar mín an smacht, which means there is no prosperity without discipline. And that was my motto for the whole thing. Like, if I want to prosper, and not only just me, but like if I want to contribute to legal analysis in my own way, this is how it has to be done. I'm not saying it was easy. It was, personally, I found it the most taxing thing I've ever done. And my mother did a master thesis when I was in junior cert in secondary school, and I had so much respect for my mother after I wrote my own master thesis, because like she had 3 children, a full-time job, and like, you know, she was minding us, whatever, and she still managed to write her thesis. All I had to do was write my thesis. I had a lot going on myself, but I just respect anybody who completes a thesis and also is proud of the work they have, because, you know, long story short, it goes into like a fancy book like this. You present it to your lecturer and that's it. Like, you know, you're done. You have it for the rest of your life, and you kind of only get one shot to get it right. So yeah, like, I hope you learned something from my advice. I hope you don't struggle as much as I did And I hope you ask for help from your lecturer. Because one thing I did, and I really regret it, I tried to do it all myself. Typical. Tried to do it all myself without any input from others. And you know, there's so many people around who know much more than you. So make sure you do reach out and ask for help if you're struggling with some part of your thesis. Okay, I won't keep you any longer. Get back to work, and I'll see you in the next one.